Hello everybody, here we are today talking about how it's been a minute since an NHL head coach has been fired and seeing who could possibly be next. But before we get started with it, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. Being said, let's get on into it. So last season we saw 11 head coaches get fired. This year there's only been 4, and it's been a minute since the last one happened, which was on December 26th. Derek Lalonde ended up getting the boot by the Red Wings a day after Christmas, which stings, but has brought a period of about 2 months where we haven't seen any other NHL head coaches let go, which is kind of interesting. I know the tournament probably helped in that regard, but now here we are with about a third of the season or less, seeing who could possibly be next. And I think starting this off, I do want to say there's not a particular number I have in mind for coaches that will get fired, but I think that these are just some names that could be on the chopping block, starting off with Mike Sullivan. Sullivan has been a coach we've talked about kind of extensively here on the channel before in this regard. And it is unfortunate because his time started off really well for the Pittsburgh Penguins, champions in 2016 and 2017. He can point to the Raptors and say, yeah, I'm responsible for 2 of those banners, and that's great. And even afterwards, for a little bit there, they were kind of a well-oiled machine during the regular season where they would go to the playoffs and then ultimately falter a little bit. But in recent years, this is where the problem really lies. As they haven't made the playoffs in back-to-back years and look like they'll miss yet again, this year actually looks like it would be their worst year in terms of points percentage since the 2005-06 season. Things are different. This is a different era of Pittsburgh hockey, and unfortunately, I think that Sullivan's probably on his way out in a year that's probably just not looking very good for him. I know that he's probably trying as well as he can to finish out the year strong, but they kind of got a dose of reality with an 8-3 loss to the Washington Capitals. They got thumped to start off the return of the season, and that is just kind of continuing what it looks like has been a bad run for him. Obviously coaching USA, and they end up losing. Charlie McAvoy, his son-in-law, gets hurt during that time, and then you realize that the highlight of his year could be that he gets to keep his job at the end of the season. It's just going to be an uphill battle, and unfortunately I think Pittsburgh will miss once again. And despite Mike Sullivan's contract situation where he's got, I think, himself signed through the 26-27 season, it's probably the end of the road for Sullivan in his tenure with Pittsburgh. Now the next guy we have up here is Andrew Brunette. Brunette is an interesting coach here because if you would have told me at the start of the year that he would possibly get fired, I'd say hell. Nashville, 99 points last year, a hard-fought first-round loss to the Vancouver Canucks, really set the stage for what could have been a very positive year. They go out there and they get, again, some big-name free agents, and they just make moves that make you say, wow, this could be Nashville's breakthrough. This could be possibly one of their best years in franchise history. But it's not. They sit 14th in the Western Conference, and they sit, I think 30th in the league for league standings. It's almost unimaginable how this team could be so bad. In my season preview, I talked about how they had a former Rocket Richard winner, a former Norris Trophy winner, and then a Vezina caliber goalie or contender in Soros. So to know what they have in this lineup and what they brought in, it's just crazy to me to think that they could be down there with teams like San Jose and Chicago. But that is reality right now. And of course, Brunette is in charge of this team, and he's going to take the brunt of this because of their failures in a year that's been just really bad. And I think kind of the problem here too is Nashville's been consistently good for a while. Barry Trotz is a coach and now a GM that expects success, and this team is just not bringing it. And now I think the problem is you have a year that is just so bad that came out of nowhere unexpectedly with a GM like Trotz that could probably expect results again as soon as next season, that he might say, we've had enough. You know, you had 82 games to get it turned around. You never really truly did, and this team is just going to need a new voice in the locker room to try to take over. And that's why I think that this is probably the end of the road for him. I do think that Brunette will probably end up getting fired. You know, it's crazy considering his time with the Florida Panthers and how well that went and how successful last year went with Nashville, where they went on that like 18-game point streak or something like that, and just shows you how fast things can kind of turn around, as I imagine the state of Tennessee will have a new head coach during this summer. Not exactly sure how things will play out. Maybe they will give him the benefit of the doubt and say, let's roll it back or run it back going into next season. Hoping so for his case, but ultimately, this has been one of the most disappointing teams I can remember in recent memory. Now, the next head coach that we're talking about here is one we've kind of had conflicting arguments about before, and that's Martin St. Louis of the Montreal Canadiens. St. Louis, well-known guy. Seems to be a guy that's well-liked, but his time in Montreal has not been uber successful. Now, this team obviously hasn't been truly competitive for some time, probably at some point in the mid to late 2010s. And this team just, again, I think is having periods where you can see some growth in some ways. And this year looked pretty promising until a bad form before the break, 1-7-1. They did win last night, and that's where I think things kind of get weird because this could end up being a better year than what they saw last year. But you would realize that at this stage of his coaching tenure, he would be in his third full season by the end of the season. Actually, he will be completing his third full season at the end of this year with Montreal. He's already been with them for 4 years now. Mind you, that was a partial stint in the very first go of it. But if he ends up going out there and missing the playoffs again, it would be 3 straight seasons. And I don't think that it's necessarily that he could be gone by this year. I think more so next year would probably be the nail in the coffin. You don't see head coaches go out there and miss the playoffs 4 straight years in a row and tend to have great job security. And I know Montreal, again, is kind of going with this argument that in the future they're going to be really good. I think there are some very, very promising signs, and it's just odd, and I don't really know where to place this because I would like to coach for a team that, isn't ready to be a contender just yet. You'd imagine they'd give him more time, but I think as well too with what we see, just the results maybe not being as much as they're hoping for with the optimism. I don't know. I think how this year ends will probably decide it. Now we'll get to talk about another coach that played in the NHL, Patrick Roy. His time with the New York Islanders, I really do think is coming to an end. He has not had a very long tenure, especially considering, the stints of guys like Sullivan, who's been one of the longest tenured coaches in the league with one team. Wall, I think, hasn't even coached a full season with the Islanders. In fact, this would be his first full year because last year he took over. But looking at what we've seen from this team beforehand, Barry Trotz couldn't even keep his job, and he was taking this team to the verge of the Stanley Cup final. And again, like I've said before, it probably does eat away at Islanders fans, knowing that those years where Tampa Bay beat Dallas and Montreal, they very well could have been Stanley Cup champions, but that's kind of in the past. But for now, though, you realize that Wall might miss the playoffs, and if Trotz can't keep his job nearly getting you to the Stanley Cup final, why would Wall be able to go out there and keep his job for this upcoming season after this? I don't know. Again, I think Lou will have a lot of big decisions to make. I think that's where it gets a little bit awkward too, because he had that whole interview saying, well, I didn't get to decide this roster necessarily with Wall, where things got a little bit awkward. And I just don't think this is going to be a good long-term fit for him in the organization, even though, again, I think this team is in a weird spot. Mind you, they have good young players that aren't just guys that are getting their first cup of coffee in the NHL. These are guys that are established in the league but are still young. Some of these good young players are on long-term deals. But the thing is, they're not there to contend right now, or they're not able to contend right now, but they are nowhere near being a bottom 4 team by any means. They've got, again, I think enough pieces of talent to make you say we want to roll the dice and try to see what we can do, even though I'd advise against it. But with Wall, I just don't think it's going to be able to happen. So I do think that he is one of the more likely to go by the end of the year. Again, I think this is all situational on how you finish. If they lose, 7 of their last 10 to close out the year, and they're pretty healthily out of the playoff picture, definitely kind of, book it, but still, maybe he's able to stick around. Again, I think contract situations, people are more likely to defend people and say they're more safe or less safe. I don't think that applies as much as people seem to think, considering what we've seen before in the league. Now, as for the final head coach, we have somebody that you probably wouldn't have expected on this list until you see where they're at right now. That is Peter Laviolette of the New York Rangers. This team, just last year, won the President's Trophy, best record in the league, and went to the Eastern Conference Final. Again, on the doorstep of the finals or the Stanley Cup Final, and now they are a team that looks like they'll miss the playoffs. This is a team that looks like they will drop in the standings by about 30 points, and this is a side that has traded away some youth, Kaapo Kakko, Philip Hedl, and they did try to go out there and bring in a big name in JT Miller as part of the Hedl trade, but the kid line has been broken up as it is shattered, really at this stage, and this team is in a weird spot where they just kind of got a dose of reality too. Again, some of these teams that you wouldn't expect to just be getting throttled, or they lost 8-2 to the Buffalo Sabres last night in the return from the break. Buffalo is dead last in the Eastern Conference, and they are a team that, while not probably being as bad as some other teams like San Jose, shouldn't be beating you 8-2 when you are in the midst of a playoff hunt. I don't know how this will actually play out because New York may be able to sneak into the playoffs. Again, they've got a lot of pieces where they have shown that they can be good enough to probably get in the playoffs and even make some noise if they got in there, because there is certainly a lot of talent still. But I don't know if Laviolette's job is secure, especially if they miss out on the playoffs. He hasn't been there super long, but the drop-off paired with it being a big market team that has seen a lot of recent success, I think would make it very hard for him to go out there and be able to defend his position because, again, there's just so many names. Fox, I know, of course, is a big one. Of course, you've got Panarin. Now you've got Miller. Now you've got Shesterkin. I mean, there just are so many things that probably are holding him back from being able to stay in the Big Apple, even if he wants to. So it's kind of ironic in a way, I guess, talking about this video where you could see Wall and then, of course, Laviolette fired, despite them finishing much better than a guy like Lindy Ruff. But Ruff has kind of that romanticism with the Buffalo Sabres with the good years, and this is his first year back with the team. So it was just going to be ironic in that way to say, oh, I was safe even though I performed worse than you did. But it's just kind of a parting thought that I had that goes on in my brain. Now, that all being said, do I think all of these head coaches are going to get fired? Not necessarily. Maybe not even this year, especially. I think some of these are more situational on, again, probably next year, especially with Martin St. Louis. But I would imagine as well, too, that a good chunk of these probably could get the boot. And there's other names I didn't mention this year as well, too. John Tortorella, I think, is possibly a good example. Again, Philadelphia is such a hard team to get a read on. I feel like Philadelphia and Calgary really do confuse me at times. They're at different spots in terms of where they are right now. But, sometimes you're like, well, they've got these younger players that he's giving more minutes to. And, they are not in as bad of a spot as they probably could have been. But yeah, John Tortorella, I didn't really kind of talk about him because I wasn't really sure how I wanted to take that kind of route. But either way, it's not like it's just these 5 guys that could be canned. Ultimately, though, I do think that for a variety of reasons, we'll probably see less head coaches get fired than last year. I don't think it'll be too much less, but I think with a lot of the guys that got fired last year, you bring in coaches that are in their first year this year, so they get kind of that benefit of the doubt, especially some rookie head coaches, some teams where maybe you expected coaches to get fired, but they are, definitely outperforming the expectations. So that's why I kind of imagine that it'll probably be less than 10. But we'll keep an eye out for it. Who are some coaches that you think are on the hot seat? Who are some guys that you think are probably going to be able to actually be safe despite them kind of being in murky waters? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe. Have a great night. And you go all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.